it's in the template doesn't mean it's not. The templates could be wrong.
Well, no, right, because
the documentation is still talking about gulp and grunt,
Well,
unless
so
they're
no,
going to choose to.
we have evidence that grunt and gulp are out for the templates in Visual Studio.
Right. Oh, right. I mean, are we going to talk about Yeoman? I guess we can.
Well, see, that's the other thing is there's Yeoman.
You know what? I think the scope of this conversation is what's in docs.asp.net, right?
Yep, because gulp and grunt are there.
The gulp and grunt are there.
Right, and Hanselman just did a Yeoman post last week. But I feel like there's 3 ways to create a .NET project now. There's Yeoman, but who maintains that? Who maintains Yeoman? Is that community? Is that going to be like hands off, but community? If you go contribute to Generator ASP.NET, that's how you get in. Then there's .NET command line. Then there's File New Project, and we've seen File New Project shifted with this last set of tooling. But .NET New did not shift, and what I don't know is maybe it's just behind. Maybe they just haven't shifted it yet. But then there's a logical explanation of, well, if you .NET New from the command line, you don't have Visual Studio, so you don't have the magic, like the bundling minification and stuff that you were going to use gulp for.
No, you do. That's the beauty of the new thing that they did, is that it's a task.
No, but what I mean, the bundler minifier it's built into Visual Studio, right?
No, it's a package like anything else.
I think we should start recording.
Okay, so maybe it won't. Maybe it'll go away. Maybe it won't be in the templates much longer.
So here's what's interesting. What's on the documentation shows you doing this from Visual Studio. And it still shows that the gulp file is sitting there.
Which is not
what you're saying
true.
Is incorrect now.
No, it's absolutely incorrect. You file a new project right now, there is no gulp file.
No, yeah, definitely not.
That went out on release on RTM. And yes, the documentation will. This is a problem with the documentation. It will always be behind. Because, well, I shouldn't say that, because somebody will come in and say, no, you're totally wrong. It'll not always be behind. But they're counting on people to come and help keep it up to date. So how can it not always be behind?
So yeah, the way I look at this is they know the people that are going to use gulp and grunt. They don't necessarily need the template to have it in there. They're going to choose to use it either way. And
I think that's what they feel. I think they've decided that trying to teach the community gulp and grunt is a bad idea.
Well, also, this is based on things I've heard from Hanselman before about the jQuery version they include in Visual Studio. They have to go through lawyers and things, so who knows, they may not want to take that liability. So by releasing their own out-of-the-box feature, like, here, this works, but you can still use gulp and grunt.
Yeah.
That feels to me more like there's more to this than just they just decide to remove it.
Yeah,
there's some
start recording.
There's some.
I think they also came to their senses, and because you know what, every single time I talked about this, the number one thing people hated was, like, I don't want to learn anything new. Why do I have to learn gulp? That's stupid. What was wrong? What was wrong with bundling and minifying? It worked. It was great. It's really nice to have it. I buy Visual Studio because it's a one and all, does everything for me.
And I guarantee 95% of people didn't even do it.
No, well, I know they don't. I am still floored by how website after website after website I go to is not bundled, not minified. I mean, I'm talking like Forbes, Wall Street Journal.
Yep. That's the first thing when I come to a project. All right, have we minified anything? And they're like, oh, yeah, we threw some things in. I'm like, that's the generated stuff that says jQuery. You've added 5 other jQuery things. You didn't include it in there.
And then the thing about bundling is I know that someday bundling will be the wrong thing to do, but I don't think we're at someday. There aren't enough web servers and everything
someday
supporting
we'll have WebAssembly, and this will all go away.
I honestly believe that day will never come, but
it's coming this year. I've read it.
It'll never happen.
Hold on! Oh my God! This is gold, guys.
JavaScript is actually becoming more powerful. I'm using it everywhere.
All right, let's hit record. Let's hit record.
Nobody needs that stupid static typing anymore.
It's not WebAssembly. WebAssembly is packaging.
Nobody needs the other languages.
Binary format data.
Compile to JavaScript.
Are we ready? We're gonna hit record.
Chris, you missed the other day our lengthy discussion again.
I wanted to go
how
to
the browser is evil.
I wanted to go to Joy's thing.
It was very good. It was actually probably one of the best ones he's done.
We're talking about that exact stack, and I don't know anything about it at all. Like nothing.
It was great. Oh, he did the whirlwind tour, everything in there.
Yeah.
Spark is the tool.
Yeah. All right, are we hitting record?
I guess we are going to.
Let's do it.
What are we talking about?
The .NET tooling experience, comparing it to the documentation, and what we know is now in the template versus what the documentation says, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think we're going to have a short show after the last two really long ones. We'll just hop on and talk for 30 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. I know. That's a challenge. Let's be done recording by midnight. Let's see if we can do
Yes. 45 minutes. Ready?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I got to start Audacity.
We're so close to getting done by 12. Now it's going to be 12:30.
I actually need to make sure I don't have that horrible line noise again.
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
Okay.
So, Todd, do you want me to hand it off to you? I feel bad. I often hand it off to Chris after I do the intro. I just want to stop talking myself, and
with this one, you hand it off to Chris. He knows more than I do.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Chime in. I had to fix my date though. Just give me a minute. Freaking date.
Oh, I know how I'm going to derail the conversation at the end.
How?
No, never mind. We're not doing 45 minutes.
Oh, great. Are you going to introduce Tech Bash first or at the end?
No, I'll just add that later.
Okay. All right, today is the 15th.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
What about TypeScript tooling?
Crap.
You don't need tooling with TypeScript. It's magic code. This magically does what you want.
All right, where is this grunt gulp? You were looking at it right now?
I googled ASP.NET Core with gulp, and I came to a page. It's underneath client-side development. And there's one called using gulp. One called using grunt. You want a link?
Sure. Bootstrap? No, I'm on it.
Okay.
So weird. They're selling Bootstrap? Man.
There's Yeoman here too. Building project with Yeoman.
Very opinionated. Angular? Knockout? No Ember? No React?
Those technologies are evil and old, man.
Well, so is Angular a Knockout?
Well, Knockout is. I don't know why they got Knockout there. They don't have a purpose anymore.
Yeah.
That's because the guy still works for Microsoft, does he?
This is very weird. Are you ready, Chris? We lost Chris.
Did he go disconnect? No, he's still here. He looks frozen.
I need a minute to actually figure out my opinions about these tools.
What do you mean? Good
I don't really know how.
I look at it as the world. We're finally getting back to the days of JCL. All of the command line.
Yeah, well, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
I have people. Here, you go figure this out for me. I got things to architect. I think my opinion is going to be more about everything constantly changing, and that you have to. The idea of scripting things is good, but you don't necessarily marry yourself to gulp or grunt or anything else, because now there's was it web deploy? There's lots of other choices out there. These are just two.
Chris, we lost you. Can see you on your second camera. Can't hear you.
Is he moving? No, you know he's moving. Christopher! Ew.
Oh no!
Oh, I told you we weren't making it midnight.
And there goes midnight.
We were so close. So I like, you saw the anniversary edition, right? I like how their action center is much more brighter.
Yes.
colorful now. It's annoying.
My favorite thing, especially because on this PC I'm always switching between output devices, the sound devices,
Yeah.
is the little thing on the audio thing where you can click on it and you got it right there. It's really nice. I assume that was in the anniversary update. I'm actually running on I think this is slow
Are you
rank.
talking about the little drop down now that comes up?
The pop-up, yeah. Yep.
I'm not sure if that was there before.
What?
I think you used to have to go in and select it, right?
Yeah.
I think it was buried before.
Oh, great.
Chris! Welcome to the Static Void podcast video. Well, we tried to stop recording. 1 o'clock. Hey, we're finally ready to record.
In this episode, Chris gets his camera and audio set up.
I think we need better tooling for that. Forget Gulp and Grunt.
Yeah, this is the tooling episode. We don't mean dev tooling.
I think my other opinion on this stuff is it's hard to make the right choice. Bower versus Nomen versus NPM. There's like all these different things, and how do you figure it out?
For some reason, my webcam stopped working.
You were on for a second.
I know.
Have you turned it off and turned it back on again?
Yes. Sure.
Have you set your lower third? Because that's the most important part.
My line noise is just, honestly, it's like scratchy. I don't even talk.
It's so weird. On your blue?
Yeah. Like if I don't say anything, it's like a needle scratching a record. And this is the problem I had in the Fritz show.
The cord? Got a problem with it? Bent or anything?
Oh, do you have like your gain amped up? Check your sound settings, the Windows sound settings. Make sure you don't have any like gain or anything. Or audio equalizer. If you just reinstalled Windows or upgraded Windows, it might have added new stuff.
Nah. Windows adding new stuff? At least they didn't move everything around like they normally do.
That's the world we're living in, man. Evergreen updates with Windows adding new stuff on a regular basis.
Just like mobile devices.
Dogs and cats living together.
I know. The world will never be the same.
I think I remember what it was.
Do you want AGC off, Jess?
Yes.
Mine was on again.
Well, that would explain your line noise.
Well, when you said something about upgrade, I'm like, I wonder if that thing went back on. What is that exactly, that setting? Because it's very descriptive. AGC.
AGC is audio gain.
All right. I think I'm in better shape, although
Automatic gain control.
Obviously, I've lost this camera.
Well, I refuse to record with you on a subpar camera.
Currently, I have no camera.
Oh, look at that. Somehow made the save there. I don't even know how.
What's going on?
Amazingly started working. Although, we'll see
You're
when we hit. We'll see when we hit
broadcasting
record. That will be the.
You're not broadcasting to us right now.
I'm not. You can't see me.
No. Maybe you need to disconnect, reconnect.
It shows me.
Yeah, I can see you. You're good.
I don't see him.
I see him.
I don't see him.
How many fingers am I holding up?
Nothing. I see only your face.
Oh, see, you're missing it. You're missing the fingers.
You're holding up 5.
Dang it!
I don't see it. That's interesting. How the hell does that work?
Okay. All right. I think I'm good. Finally.
Todd, try and drop off and rejoin.
Sure.
Do you know our?
Be able to see Chris.
Do you know our agenda of topics?
Oh, is there an agenda?
No.
Is this organized?
I'm asking you. Because so obviously the client side tooling. But
I
then
thought we were just going to talk.
Oh, okay.
That's what we do because we're professionals now.
We talk about ASP.NET Core though, right?
Yeah. Well, tooling. The tooling that you would use when building an ASP.NET Core app. That is the show.
I didn't play with OmniSharp enough. I did like a year ago.
Yeah, sure. Well, I would love to get into the .NET Core tooling, but I'm not sure we're going there other than to say you create a new project. If you want to take it there, I'm fine. I can't talk about it.
Neither.
Yeah, I don't know the command line tooling. I know that there's ways to publish and stuff.
We can also have a Mr. Robot show.
Are you caught up? Are you caught up?
Yes, that's last week.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just watched. I think I watched it today.
Last week was a very interesting episode.
I just watched it last night.
It was quite entertaining.
Yes. Yeah.
Scary though, but entertaining.
Yes. It's awesome. It's awesome.
So Chris, you've seen all of season 1, right?
I'm caught up.
Yes. Okay. As of last week?
Yeah, I saw the show.
This is the mindfuck of the mindfuck wrapped in another mindfuck. I like the end though, the whole little Ocean's 11 thing. The whole thing with Terrell in the trunk.
Yeah.
That was just hilarious. And the Mr. Belvedere looking font.
Yeah, that guy, man. I mean, I didn't even look up if he's a signed guest star for the season because we sure haven't heard much of him.
No. That was him there, though. He was talking.
Tyrell.
Yeah.
Yeah. He makes breathy phone calls every once in a while.
The only good part about it, his wife is not as much because she was a bit freaky.
Yeah. She's in it too much. What are you talking about?
She was. She was in it a whole lot.
Bone Swamp. No, she's in it this season. She's in it a lot.
Yeah, with the other guy and
Episode, right?
the random guy that you're like, who the hell is this other guy that has information on them?
Why do we care about him?
Where the hell did he come from?
It's funny though, like when you think about standard guest star contracts usually being like 3 or 6 episodes. Yeah. So what'll happen is I'll see somebody in 2 episodes and I'll say, all right, they're only going to be in 1 more. That could be good or bad because like I think Shayla had a 6 episode. I didn't know that about her.
Yeah.
But you're like, oh look, episode 6, not good for the guest star.
They're done.
I'm gonna say bonsoir and welcome to the Static One podcast.
Today we're going to talk about Kali Linux.
Bonsoir, listeners.
What do you know about Kali Linux? Nothing really. I mean,
I've seen Mr. Robot.
Yeah, ifconfig. I was like, oh, dude, totally. ifconfig, yeah.
It doesn't run on my freaking Surface Book, is what I know about it.
Because that's not a hacker compliant.
No,
laptop.
It sure as hell is not.
Yeah, but wait a second. The secure boot keys are out, so now you can
No, it's not that. It's driver. It's Linux
Something else?
driver.
Oh, okay.
It's Linux driver issues.
Big
You
surprise.
can get it working. So like on just the standard distros, the release distros with the standard kernels, if you like plug in the USB keyboard and stuff, it'll work. But who wants to? It's a laptop. You don't want to have
Yeah.
USB keyboard and mouse. So then if you plug in the USB keyboard and mouse to install it, and then get the latest kernel, there's a certain kernel, then apparently you get a lot more, but it's still flaky. Like the Wi-Fi works, but only for like a couple hours, and then it cuts out, and the hibernate or the sleep doesn't work. Like it never wakes back
So
up.
now you're describing the last
from
episode of
sleep.
Mr. Robot, the how Wi-Fi cut out there.
Yeah.
So I have to ask a question. So is Windows 10 Bash part of this developer tool set now?
Not for me. No.
I haven't tried
But you
it.
can run your npm things in Bash. Come on.
Yeah.
I ran one
Barnes
command. I ran
Swamp.
list ls. I'm like, oh great, I'm now a Unix developer on Windows. I can run Unix commands again. My
All
life
right,
is
we're all
good.
good. It's 11:30.
Okay.
I was waiting for 12 to start.
I
I think
still
we're
know.
good.
Are we good?
Yes, let's go.
Sure.
Let's do it.
Barnes Swamp, our listeners. All right. All right. We'll do 20 seconds.
Ready to go, Elliot?
3, 2, 1. Hello, and welcome to the Static Void Podcast. I'm Jess Chadwick,
I'm Todd Snyder.
And I'm Chris Gomez.
and we are your hosts. We're recording this on the evening of August 15th, 2016, and in this episode, we're going to be continuing on with our series of episodes on .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. So in the last episode, we danced around the idea of what, excuse me. In the last episode, we danced around the idea of what tooling options are available for common tasks like creating a new project or bundling and minifying your CSS and JavaScript. So in this episode, we're going to get right back into it, pick right up where we left off, and just continue talking about the tooling. So when you are creating any web application, but especially a web application in ASP.NET, you've got a lot of options at your disposal. So, Chris, what do you think about the tooling options that are coming out with ASP.NET Core? The things that Microsoft is kind of recommending, the things that the team is recommending, the things that are coming out in the templates, and then just other alternatives.
Yeah, I took a look at the template that comes out of Visual Studio, and some things have changed from earlier builds. I think if you've been plugged in and following for a while, then you saw that the plan was to make some modern web tools out there in the community, like Gulp, a first-class citizen, NPM was a first-class citizen. What I see now in the what I see now in the template that you create in Visual Studio 2015, though, is they're still using Bower. So we'll probably want to talk about what Bower is.
Yeah.
But Gulp is gone, and the tasks that Gulp used to do, bundling and minifying, have been replaced. There's that bundle config.json, which you were saying, I think you know how that ties in, because I don't actually know how that ties in. I thought that tied into the IDE, but that's not true. That's that bundler minifier.core.
Yeah. Well, so what tools do you use today? So forget about ASP.NET Core. Like, what is your setup right now, both of you?
It depends. And the reason it depends is whether or not it's ASP.NET or Node. That's really the inflection point in the real world for me. Is if I'm in ASP.NET land, then you're using what's built into the IDE, because that's kind of your best option.
So you're not using the Node tooling the gulp and the grunt and all of those things. You're not using those with your ASP.NET apps. You've got kind of a
No,
clean separation there.
no, and I'm not, and that's both at kind of whether it's at home or demoing or in the workplace. I just feel like I don't think some of the ideas that, the idea that you could bring all this stuff into your Visual Studio IDE is sunk in for, legacy. The applications, I don't think it's sunk in for the applications you're working on now.
Okay. So I think I would agree with that it's not necessarily fully integrated with the IDE. So like, with the exception of recently they have Task Runner. So you have the Task Runner Explorer, which is integrated in Visual Studio, which can shell out to whatever task runner you want. It has awesome integration for gulp and grunt, and probably even more that I'm not even aware of. But ultimately, it is just shelling out to them. Like they are still command line tools. It doesn't change the fact that they are command line tools. It's just not forcing you to go to a command line to use them. It's just giving you kind of an interface on top of them.
Yeah, and that works today. That works. Forget, you don't even need .NET Core. That works. ASP.NET 4.6 works today. Task Runner Explorer, you have to go get an extension for 2013, if I remember correctly. But in VS 2015, you can get it to run your tasks for gulp, grunt, NPM, and there may be some more support. To be honest, I feel like it's Mads Christensen is crazy man who some new thing is out there and he gets a extension kind of in the pipeline pretty quickly.
Yeah. So what about you, Todd? What's your current kind of tooling situation with your web applications?
Yeah, so it varies from project to project, but over the last year or so, we've been starting to use gulp and grunt more for some kind of build tasks, particularly for minifications and things. I also did a bunch of work with Cordova, where gulp and grunt were much more necessary because you have to do a lot of chaining of things to do with certificates and things, that it was just easier, and documentation kind of pushed you towards using gulp and grunt. But some places you still just use the out-of-the-box stuff for bundling and minification. I know I've had some challenges getting it to work, and it kind of seems more of a stopgap than what you can get with gulp and grunt. Because gulp and grunt, it's just a tool, right? It's just a command line tool. You can do anything you want.
Yeah, right.
I think part of the challenge a lot of people have had isn't necessarily that those tools are good or bad. It's they keep changing. Which one should you use? It seems like now there's 10 different choices of things. So you kind of gravitate towards something for one project. If you start a new project, you're like, well, this time we're going to use Grunt and we'll use Bower, but last time we used NPM. It all depends really on what you're like. Hey, today I want to use this.
Yeah, and there are movements in the community, right? Like, at the start of the ASP.NET vNext stuff, they were excited to say, well, we're going to use Bower as the package manager for client-side scripting. But
which used to be NuGet, right? Primarily.
Well, sure, we would get our client-side jQuery and Angular through NuGet, but I think there were problems with that, which we've discussed in the past, is somebody has to go make the NuGet package, where the nice thing about Bower is it's a GitHub check-in and it's done, essentially. Yeah. But if you want to judge by what you will Google, what blogs you'll land on when you Google, Bower has fallen out of favor. People say, well, why not just pull it from NPM? Why are you even bothering with Bower?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of an exceptional case, though. I don't necessarily think that it was a very popular system, a very popular package management repository and tooling to go along with it that was used by a lot of people, is still used by a lot of people. I think it fell out of grace because the reason it got so popular is because it kind of solved this problem that the other tools didn't, namely NPM itself didn't, but not for technical reasons, just because people weren't actually publishing their static stuff, like their client-side stuff on NPM. Like, everybody was just kind of like, NPM is just for node packages. In other words, server-side node packages. And it wasn't a rule. It was just kind of a convention. It was just kind of, that's what the community did, and you don't really put client-side stuff on there. And then the lines kind of blurred a little bit, right? Like this whole isomorphic thing, like what is client side, what's server side.
Yeah.
But then also it's just Bower didn't really add anything to that, right? It basically just implemented exactly the way that Node did things, except for a couple places where it didn't, and it actually caused some problems. I mean, I'm not really going to go into details, but that's really all you need to know is that people were starting to get a little frustrating with the limitations of the tool. Meanwhile, NPM was maturing, I guess you could say, more rapidly, or at least it was addressing some of these issues, and it had all of the same features and more and fewer issues, right? And again, there was never any technical reason that you couldn't host client-side stuff on there in the first place. So I think people kind of started realizing, like, hey, let's just use this thing, right?
Yeah, why have an
And
extra layer
the
in
ultimate
between?
irony is that Bower is an npm tool. Like you have to
Yeah.
install
You
npm
need
to
you
get
need to know
Bower. So like
npm to run Bower. So
yes,
The
you
one thing
have
that
it
I've
already. So like
Yeah. The one thing that I've wondered about Bower, though, is with the Bower RC file, isn't it trivially easy to say, go get these client static files and put them right here? And I don't know if it's trivially easy in NPM. I mean, what people end up doing is
setting a location.
making it part of their scripting, right?
Yeah, well, no, because it's the same. They use the same techniques, right? They go and grab this thing from the repo, probably a Git repo or GitHub repo, probably, and take that folder and just extract it. Pull it down, clone it to some folder. And yes, you can kind of say where these folders go, but you can also do that in npm. Like you can set the default folder in npm. So, and that is one of the main kind of things that has made npm kind of people move back to npm, because that is one of the things that you can configure and they manage a
Yeah.
little bit
So
better.
I don't know how to do that yet then, because what I'm finding is if I use npm to get a client dependency, I end up writing a script to move it to where I actually want it. I wish that was
Yeah,
just in the package JSON.
yes, and you can do that, and that is, I mean, the whole context of this conversation is the tooling, the ASP.NET Core tooling, right? And that's kind of the defaults that it provides, is it just kind of puts it in the WW root in kind of a conventional layout. You kind of know where to have it. But I mean, ultimately, I think most places are going to implement some kind of bundling minification, something like that, in which case, by the time you're doing that, to say, well, take it from here and output it over here is completely trivial. I agree with you. The fact that you have to do that kind of sucks, but you don't have to do that. You can configure Node to put all of your Node packages in your www root.
Well, you raised an
Not that
interesting
that's
point.
necessarily what you want to do, but
You said, what are most people going to do? Well, if this file new project holds to final tooling for .NET Core, then most people are going to be using Bower and not NPM, because there's no NPM to be found in this. At least there isn't a package JSON. But Bower is here.
well, npm by definition. I mean, npm Node has to be on your system to run Bower, and
Node has to be on the system, but there is no package JSON. So you figure
sure.
your developer who comes here, and there's going to be a whole segment of developers that when they file a new project on an ASP.NET Core app, Bower, yeah, I've heard about this Bower, but I don't know. I don't know what it does. And they'll probably right-click on dependencies here and say manage packages, and it'll be a NuGet-like experience for them, except using Bower.
Yes. Well, and I
Which would be
think you nailed
familiar.
it. I think, oh, yeah, and yes, and the UI, the GUI that you use to manage your Bower packages, I think, I'm guessing, I have no idea, I have no insight, but I'm guessing is probably a similar or the same code base as the NuGet package manager, because it looks incredibly the same, and it's a mirror kind of experience, which is really great. Honestly, I think the reason that they're including Bower is because, like npm was never supposed to have client-side libraries, neither was NuGet, right? It wasn't
Sure.
built for that. It was built, but
Or
the difference
binaries.
between npm and NuGet is that npm hosts JavaScript files. Like that's what it
Yes.
does. That's what Node runs on, and so it just hosts JavaScript files. Whereas NuGet was built to host DLLs,
Yeah,
compiled
.NET code.
Yes, compiled assemblies and deliver those and register them as as references in Visual Studio, and all of that. And so it was never really meant, it was never intended to host client-side content, to host things like jQuery, Bootstrap, and things like that. But devs in Visual Studio who were using NuGet for all of their packages were like, well, why can't I just go one place? Like, they loved it, right? They loved not having to go out to the web. Exactly. Like, that was the biggest thing. NuGet handles dependencies and things like that, and I don't know if we're going to get into it in this show, but NuGet is at the core of the .NET tooling, right? Even though you never really say NuGet, when you go into your project JSON and you say, go and get this package, it's NuGet getting it behind the scenes. It's called something else now, and it's kind of hidden, but like it's NuGet.
The delivery mechanism of .NET Core.
Yes.
Where in .NET Desktop Framework, you went to some website and you pulled down the exe and you installed 200 megs of stuff.
Yeah.
Try to figure out all the DLLs are and location.
They wanted that experience for the client side, and so they said, well, let's put NuGet on there, and it's a public repo, so what's stopping us, right? Like, I can go and put NuGet on there, or sorry, I can go and put jQuery on there. I can put Angular, right? And so they did that, and it worked okay. But because it wasn't meant for that, it was always kind of awkward, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so I think that now Microsoft just kind of wants to discourage people. There's nothing wrong with NuGet hosting the content, although for a while they were talking about literally disallowing it. Like, it's not going to support that anymore. I think they backed off of that. So technically it does support it, but I think this is really kind of their push to offer an alternative, to say, here's Bower. That's what it meant. That's what it's meant for.
And for a lot of people, it was the standard way of doing things before switching over to NPM. So we made a couple of comments I think that are important to kind of take a step back. Outside of the Microsoft world, a lot of people are now using NPM, Bower, Yeoman, these other kind of command line tooling to do web development. In the Microsoft world, we're kind of catching up to these tools. And I think part of the challenge is that these things are constantly evolving. Right? Years ago, there was, I can't remember which one was first, Gulp or Grunt. I think Gulp was first, but then all of a sudden, now we want to use Grunt. In the web world, and this kind of ties into the whole idea of why Bower and NPM stuff, things are always moving, right? When I have a DLL, the next release of that is a major thing to create a new DLL and release it. Web, everything's on GitHub, right? The next version of jQuery could be out 2 days from now. And you have that frictionless environment when you use more of a command line to go get things versus trying to get stuff out of NuGet. And I just think it's important to state that outside of the Microsoft world, these tooling are more embedded in the day-to-day activities of the developer. While in the Microsoft world, we are more used to the convenience of Visual Studio. So unless Visual Studio gives us that out-of-the-box experience, some people may not even realize they're using it or may never adopt it. Because Bower is built into Visual Studio 2015, people are going to end up using it, even if it necessarily isn't the right piece. Yeah.
Whether they're
not popular anymore outside of the Microsoft world.
Yeah, I think that is a very legitimate concern for Bower in specific. I think Bower it's the beginning of the end for Bower. I think it's on its way out. I don't think NPM is going anywhere. But I also, back to your earlier point, Todd, you were talking about kind of a two-sided argument of there are too many choices, so how do you know which one to choose? And once you choose one, if it keeps evolving and it keeps changing, how do you keep up? Or if the ecosystem keeps changing and more choices other than what you chose continue to be added and evolve, how do you keep up with that? And I think my answer is it can be hard when you're coming into it fresh to choose because it's more or less arbitrary. Like, you're literally just seeing what gets more hits on Google, I guess.
Yeah, or someone's opinion.
Or yeah. I mean, you're talking to your friends, you're talking to people who know. But once you have chosen, it's not going anywhere, right? I mean, it's open source. At least the version that you're using, as long as it's working for you. This is tooling that is happening at development time. Right? This is just for your development time experience. So the worst case is that your dev tooling breaks, I guess. I don't even know what that would mean, because the version that you have right now, that's going to work, at least the version on your machine. Now, that aside, taking the the things that we had on NPM, people pulling packages and stuff. That all aside, as long as you have it on your machine, the current version is going to run. If it runs today, it'll run tomorrow, right? As you get more and better versions, features, enhancements, and everything, presumably they'll be backwards compatible, maybe not. But my point is, I don't really see there's a lot to kind of keep up with once you have made that choice.
Yeah, I agree with
There's
you.
nothing forcing you to upgrade your package.
Yeah, you can live with the ecosystem you want. I think it's more about two different things. One is because Visual Studio does so much for us as in the Microsoft world, it just works, right? I don't have to necessarily know all the details. I don't have to understand how Bower goes out and gets a file or NPM. It's just built in for me.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that, and I've seen some of this friction back in the 2013 days, we talked about some customers using Bower and NPM and stuff to do things, and they're like, well, the admin's not going to put this on the build server. And you've actually done stuff, Jesswood, right, where you've deployed Node on your build server and it's doing operations, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So there's a lot of places they don't want to install anything else. Even getting Visual Studio on build servers and things sometimes can be acts of God to make things work.
My personal opinion for build servers is that they should have the absolute bare minimum. And in fact, .NET Core helped you get even closer, right? Because the bare minimum is like the
runtime.
No, not even the runtime. The CLI to get the runtime.
The command line. The command line to get the runtime. Yes.
All right. So and even that doesn't have to be installed necessarily.
Yeah.
That's just
you could start with a blank machine.
Yes.
Every time and build up the app.
So
which is different than what we have today, right? I mean, the Microsoft world, one of the first things you do is, what version of .NET do I need to install in the server?
The .NET framework, yes, and that is a very significant issue today, and one of the biggest kind of redeeming factors of the next version of .NET Core. No, but to your point about NPM specifically, Node specifically, it's the same thing. Like the Node wants to be installed, that's really the easiest way, but you don't have to. Ultimately, it's just an executable and uses environment variables and stuff. There's nothing that says you need to run it as an admin or anything, especially if you're not actually serving web pages, right? If you're just using the development tooling. So I have actually scripted Node installations, and by scripted just meaning set a couple of environment variables, literally 2 or 3, and then run Node kind of completely in user mode without any admin or anything, and downloading and installing the tools, TypeScript compiler, Grunt, Gulp, whatever. So theoretically, you can go to that very clean build server that all it has is the build agent running on it, and Windows or Linux now with .NET Core. And just going and either checking in some of those executables or actually going and downloading the packages live.
So something that's new, I think, in the tooling is in the past when you would file a new project and maybe it's a web API project or something, and it did include external packages like jQuery, those were shipped in the template.
Yeah.
That's way I can describe it as airplane developer mode was enabled.
Yeah.
You could get on a plane,
it was a
no
local
internet
NuGet
access.
repository.
Yes.
Right. And
everything you needed to get started was there.
Right. And when you file a new project now, those Bower dependencies have to be restored. And the same goes for if we step away from Visual Studio for a second and go to command line and say .NET New and make a web project. Now, dependencies for Bower and NPM, which is going to bring down, at least in the current template, brings down Gulp and configures it, that's got to come from somewhere. So what I'm wondering is, when you take a dependency on these package managers, have you guys ever taken the step of securing that code somewhere internally and then maybe somehow pointing the package managers to those so that, number one, you always have it available in case of a left pad debacle?
Yeah.
And number two, I understand that we want to live in this age where they're just dependencies in the cloud, but the fact of the matter is this is now your code. You're depending on it.
Yeah.
If it went away tomorrow, it can't be the end of your business.
Yeah, there's a
That's
lot
your
of
point.
subtleties with that because especially with Node the Node tooling because the Node ecosystem is very big on the smallest packages. We talked about this with Fritz, right? He had mentioned, sometimes you have packages in Node that are literally 2, 3, 10 lines long.
Right.
And that is desirable by that ecosystem, by that community. That's kind of the way things are done. And so when you take a dependency on a package, on a NuGet or a npm package, those downstream effects you end up pulling in 200 packages, right? And they have dependencies, and they have dependencies, and it gets very complicated.
Recursive.
But yes, but if you just want to take a snapshot of that and say this is my version, and I'm all like locked down on this, and not kind of let people upgrade, so it's like just for my project or my solution or whatever, then yeah, you can absolutely do that. You have a cache. You have a cache on your local machine. You can define a cache that's on some local LAN server somewhere, and that's good. But that is the snapshot in time. Like the big issue comes when how about when I want to add new packages or
Sure.
Yeah, upgrade
Right.
certain things.
But if you're going to go live with some
upgrade the
code,
existing problem.
Yeah, that's
That's
it.
also it's also kind of a problem with NuGet, but it's a lot easier just because the community isn't all about small packages. Packages are generally a little bit bigger, so you'll generally have like a 1 or 2 level deep dependency graph. That's
So
really
we've moved from DLL hell to script file hell. We still
yeah,
have the same problem that you have
well, look,
things that may not be compatible or
I've
go
been at
out
a
of date.
couple organizations where once they decide they're going to go production with some NuGet packages, they go like grab them and put them on an internal NuGet feed that they call third-party NuGet or something.
yes.
And I think it's
Or
look, there's some
Chicken Man.
paranoia. Don't get me wrong, there's a little bit of paranoia because
And rightfully so.
right, well, yes,
Yeah.
that's just it,
This
right?
is code out on the
Is
internet. Yeah.
99.9% of the time, my build server should have no problem getting out to NuGet and getting it. And then, of course, it'll be the one time at 2 a.m. on a Sunday when you need it.
No,
Yes.
well,
So
I'm going even further than that. I'm talking about security concerns, right?
okay,
So,
sure, yeah.
generally open source is pretty widely known for more eyes, less bugs, and also more secure. That you can't just host a package out there that has this just blatant Trojan horse in it. But the way the ecosystem is, those packages could be out there, and you could hit it for the 20 minutes before it's been found by the
Yeah.
community, right? Like there's nothing stopping you from doing that. And once that code is in your firewall, you're done, right? So that is a very interesting aspect of it. So there's the one aspect of it of just getting it, the network aspect of it being available and being able to download it on your LAN or pulling it from the internet and resolving all those dependencies. But then there's also the other thing of whitelisting. So like if you're in a big organization, if you're an enterprise, you've got the security concerns, you've got the legal concerns, the open
Liability, yeah.
source, yeah, right, the
sure.
licensing.
What's the
concerns.
license?
Exactly.
How
And
is it encumbered?
yes, it's not. It's just not as simple as saying, okay, yes, fine, yes, we'll use open source. I give up. Well, I'm not. The lawyers say we're not going to fight it anymore. Go ahead and use open source, but we're not going to just let you do anything, right? Like we
Yeah.
still care about the license, so you can use anything that's MIT licensed, BSD licensed, whatever, right? And when you get all of these dependency graphs, it's crazy to kind of look at all that stuff. And so there are solutions out there that specialize in that, so that basically you're never hitting the public NPM feed. You're hitting their feed, and their service to you is allowing you to whitelist the packages that you want, or tell them your requirements. Tell them, only let BSD or MIT licensed things in, and then if you hit a package, try to pull a package in that has one of those in the dependency graph, it either doesn't list it, it doesn't show it, or it gives you an error when you try and install it, something like that.
So I think we kind of delve into two different things. When I've always looked at like things like NuGet or Bower and stuff, it's really convenient for the developer. I need to go get something quickly. We're starting to dive now into more about the production things, and I think, like any other dependency, you need to understand what your dependencies are, right? You're not going to take on some third-party thing, whether it's something you pay for or open source, and blindly say like, oh, I'm going to reference this and hope it does what I want. You do need to do the due diligence to understand what they do. To me, though, when we talk about tooling, though, it's more about the developer experience. How quickly can I get access to this version of jQuery or Angular? And then when I go to check in saying I'm going to use this version now, how quickly can you just get the code out of source control, hit F5 and work, and not
Yeah.
have to go like,
Yeah.
well, what version did you check in, or what version of files you were working on?
Yep.
I remember in the old days, you used to have to like, you'd have your DLLs in a different place, I'd have mine in the GAC, you wouldn't have yours in the GAC, and it was just crazy. It
Yeah.
was Wild West. So these things to me don't solve the problem. They somewhat amplify the problem in many ways, but it's still, that problem is not new. It's always been that problem. Anytime you take a third-party dependency, you have the risk that the liability risk, it could go away or something can go wrong with it.
Sure, right. It doesn't solve that problem, but it absolutely helps with the F5 ability with able.
Yeah, the developer
just,
experience.
Yeah, get your source code, and that's all that's checked into source control. And by the way, if you're not doing that, then you should be, right? And even if you have to host these things on-prem, and I say this from experience because I've done this, even if you have to host your NPM packages or your NuGet package, don't check them into your source control. Let them somewhere else, right? They are versions. They don't need to be in your source control. So in your source control repository, it's just your code, just your source, and then links via npm or NuGet or whatever to to these other packages.
I've been plenty of places where they checked them all in, and that was
no. And
I have been not doing it. It was like fighting a war. It's like whatever. You're making a mistake, but we got to focus on the problem at hand. So when I look at all this stuff, when I look at ASP.NET Core, and if you kind of look back from MVC first came onto the scenes until now, is they're trying to bring all this command line experience to the .NET world, which for a long time was, we weren't anti it, but it wasn't the normal experience. Right? Our normal experience was Visual Studio. Even PowerShell. How many developers use PowerShell on a day-to-day basis? And don't even tap into the power of what that can do for you and automating things. We're used to file a new project. Nope, the project does this, so I'm just going to do that. So I think it's that to me is the big change. I think for a lot of developers as we start to move the core, is this is more of a, you're expected to do things in the command line. Right? It becomes more front and center to me.
I don't actually think it's buried again, and that's the whole. That was the whole point. Is the team said, we're going to give you first-class Visual Studio tooling. I think there is going to be a whole development path where you don't care about all the stuff they did behind the scenes to make command line work, which is important.
Is that a good thing, though?
I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a dangerous thing.
They needed to make that work, so that it would work in Linux, right? But I still think, I honestly believe there's going to be a right-click and publish that will do the same thing that .NET Publish does, and then you could just go to a folder and grab it and throw it over on your Linux box.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, that's their product. They sell Visual Studio, so they are deeply invested in making that experience as productive as possible. Even if it's as productive as the one developer, the lone developer scenario, where you're literally doing everything on one machine and you don't really care about working with the team. But is that a good thing to encourage? Is having everything at your fingertips in the IDE without leaving the IDE and allowing you, practically encouraging you to be afraid of the command line, is that a good thing, or is that a crutch?
I think the nice hybrid approach is that it has all been decoupled to command line, so you can buy as much of it as you want. And now, granted, we're going to sit here and say, well, developers are going to do what File New Project says to do. But for myself, I went to a brand new Windows machine with nothing installed whatsoever, and got the .NET Core command line stuff, and I did .NET New, and I fired up Visual Studio Code, and made sure I had the C# extension, which isn't installed by default anymore. But if you do that, then it'll bring up the project, it'll automatically restore packages. Like, it's a pretty good minimal development experience.
Yes, and I don't think you're answering my question, but that's fine.
No, well, the reason why is it is answering the question because it's enabled. You couldn't do that before. In ASP.NET 4.6, you're stuck.
I'm asking about the opposite side. Yes, I know. I completely agree with you. Everything is so decoupled that the command line experience is totally accessible still. It's not abstracted away, and that is one of the coolest things with this new tooling is that the bundle minifier is both a Visual Studio extension and a package which has command line tooling. So I can work on, I mean, I haven't actually done this, I haven't tried this, So I don't know from experience, but I'm guessing from what I've seen, I can work in Visual Studio in the UI with the bundler minifier, and I check in the code, and you on Linux and Visual Studio Code pull out that source code, do a .NET restore, and you are executing the same bundling and minification logic using the same configuration and code that I wrote in your environment as I am. And that's awesome. That's amazing.
And I tried that, except I went in the reverse direction.
Yeah, well, right.
But it worked. It worked. I started in command line. I went to Visual Studio Code. And look, Visual Studio Code was one choice. I could have chosen the Atom stuff, but I didn't. And then
at that point, it's an editor. It simply doesn't even matter.
And then I went, and then I said, okay, well, now that I've done that, let me hop over to this other machine that's got Visual Studio on it and see, does it just, because this is what I wanted, does it just read the project? Please tell me there's no other magic.
Yeah.
And it did just work.
Which is important if you have different team members or even yourself, right? You might be using Linux now as your deployment environment.
Yeah.
But your development environment is still Windows, or even vice versa. Maybe you're running a Linux machine for your development, but now you still want to deploy somewhere in Azure on Windows. That's very key. And if you had a different experience, or you had to all right, now I'm in Visual Studio, I need to do these 3 other things, your frustration levels get quite high.
Oh, sure. There were little niceties too, like when you say .NET New and build a web project, it relies on gulp. But we were just talking about how the Visual Studio template doesn't. And I'm not going to pretend that I know that's where they're going to land with this tooling. But when I brought that project over to Visual Studio, the gulp tooling lit up.
Yeah, it knew it found that file.
Task Runner Explorer was there, and it worked. Everything worked.
That integration
not in the template. It worked.
Yeah.
Which
so these are examples of putting really nice UI integration on top of command line tooling, and it does just work, and it's beautiful. And I've got no problem with that. I guess just in the past, I've definitely always hated extensions in Visual Studio that were native to Visual Studio, and you couldn't even run them on the build server. That to me is just an atrocity.
Sometimes you couldn't run them in Visual Studio.
Well, right. Yeah,
or crash Visual Studio, or
you had Visual Studio, you didn't have it installed. We couldn't work on the same project, and then you check in the built artifact, right? The compiled code or the minified code or whatever. But so I definitely have a lot of history with this, and I really don't like that. And these tools are not that, right? They are definitely complementary to the stuff on the command line. I guess I have personally, and I know this is a very personal opinion, I've always personally found the command line very productive once you learn. There's a little bit of a learning curve, sometimes steep, sometimes not, but it's incredibly productive, and I feel like shielding developers from that and actively encouraging them away from it is kind of detrimental to them. Even if you can be perfectly productive in the GUI in Visual Studio alone, I feel like you're missing out on some productivity on the command line.
Yeah. I also look at it this way. We live in a world now where you're not just a .NET developer. You might be doing things in Hadoop or something else, or other environments where you're going to be using the command line.
Yeah.
So to me, having that same ability and having it, I don't say encourage, but having the flexibility to do it makes it better as a whole. Because now I'm whatever environment I'm in, jumping back and forth, I'm using the same approach. I don't have to remember, okay, Visual Studio, do this. So
yeah,
I
exactly.
think the bigger problem, and we've kind of touched about it here and there, is right now there is some confusion because the out-of-the-box templates don't use gulp and grunt, but the .NET, if you use the command line, it does use gulp and grunt, and there's lots of documentation on ASP.NET Core website or documentation website that still shows grunt working in Visual Studio. So I think if you're kind of trying to learn all this stuff, I feel like that you can get very confused very quickly what's happening and run into problems.
I feel like the templates, that middle part that you said was not true. They're not showing the grunt Visual Studio integration out of the template, right? It's not in the template.
No, it's on the documentation. They're still showing you doing things in Visual Studio.
Yes, well, because the task runner is there. It's even in 2013, right? It's available. It's ready to go. So that's something that you could be integrating in your legacy ASP.NET applications in 2013. But I completely forgot what I was going to say.
Well, or the other thing about Visual Studio, add a gulp file to your project, and the support lights up.
Which is what would you expect, right? I mean, that's the
It's
same thing
nice.
as you running.
It's
.NET.
nice, but
Yeah.
what it and hey, maybe here's a reason why you don't make it the template. In 2017, the web community may have moved on to Webpack.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Or whatever else came around.
So now we've got to get that tooling lit up, right?
Yes.
Probably in an extension fashion. So you can't have, and look, I'm defending it. I don't know that this is the reasoning. You can't have your file new project template using what the community's moved on from if that were to happen.
Yes. So that's always been my feeling about templates. I've always been very conflicted about templates because I completely agree that they are a wonderful productivity tool, but they are inherently opinionated. Like, that is why we're talking about this right now. We're talking about, well, the ASP.NET template out of the box used to have Grunt in it, and now it doesn't. Now it has the Bower config, and basically encouraging you, whatever it did include, it's implicitly at the least encouraging you to use those tools and do it that certain way. And that's great if that's the way you like, but not everybody does it the same way. And so the conversation I've had with plenty of people is, what is the alternative, right? So you don't include Bower because you don't want to have that opinion. Well, if 80%, 90% of web developers need to go get client-side packages, and Bower's a really good way to do that, why not include it, right? So
it's better than them vetting their own thing, right? Creating MS Bower.
Definitely encourage them not to do that. But
I've
always taken the approach with templates, as I did with the command line tooling, is that the UI, the templates, should be kind of augmenting the underlying ecosystem, right? So in other words, you should be able to do everything in the API without a template. First of all, I mean, that should be obvious, and obviously that's the case with ASP.NET. But then you should also be able to kind of incrementally get to that like full-blown template. Because I know the very first project I made with Yeoman was, I don't even know what it was, Angular or Node or whatever it was. I said, Yeoman, Yo Node app or Express app or something. I got 15 folders, and I got
100 megs.
Yeah, it was 100 megs, and there were 15 folders, 15 big files in the root, and I was blown away, just completely overwhelmed. Fast forward 4 months later, I've learned what each of those folders and files are for, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I want.
Yeah.
Right? So, well, except it's not that way. It is, I want 10 of those tools.
Right.
3 of those, 1 of those.
15, exactly.
So then you make your own generator.
Exactly. And so at that point,
But I'll tell you this, though. Making your own generator using Yeoman, what's the friction level compared to saying, I'm going to make a Visual Studio template for my teams to use?
It's not the beginning, it's maintaining it.
Well, sure.
Right?
It's maintaining it, but even then...
off some other one and change it. Now you got to keep up to speed.
Yeah. The problem with templates I've found, it's been a few years I've done it, was new version of Visual Studio, they didn't always work. You were kind of restarting. One of the things I really liked about, I guess a couple years ago they did this, the whole idea now, and a lot of times I do this now, I don't pick, I want an MVC project or a web API project. I pick the empty project. Give me that plain, simple surface.
So you're basically opting out of the template.
Because then I'm opting in as opposed to, because if you go with the default template, you're getting jQuery, I don't know, 1.5 or whatever. You're not getting 2.1 or whatever. Right. It's whatever version happened to match that template. You go adding 2.1, now you have all these old files. It's like 10 files you got to delete.
You're getting what their opinion was of what the correct tools to use, but you're getting it whenever they made the template, which was keeps getting older. 6 months ago, a year.
Some intern made it one day over summer vacation. Whatever it was, it works. Let's not change it. So I think this is sort of the mind shift that, as a Microsoft community, we need to start adopting from the web. Is you should really start with a clean slate and opt in the things as opposed to wanting this massive template that gives you the 100 things to start with.
Yeah.
Because 99% of the time, you may not even want those things. Right? If you're working just web API, why do you have MVC installed? Why do you have all these other pieces?
I do. So the more recent tooling, and this is going a couple of years back now for the MVC applications, or I think it's just the standard ASP.NET web application wizard. It will ask you, okay, you chose an ASP.NET application. Do you want to add MVC? Do you want to
Yeah.
add Web API? Even in the new stuff where there is no Web API.
Do you want authentication?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so it's kind of what do you want? So it's like a configurable template, which is really cool. And I know Yeoman has the ability to do that too, but of course it makes the templates more difficult to write and maintain, or at least a little more complicated. So that is the development tooling, right? This is the ecosystem that we're using to develop, to go and pull client-side packages and maybe bundle and minify them and everything. What about deployment? How has the ecosystem changed with deployment? Well, first of all, that's the same question I started out with before. What are you using for deployment today? What's your method of deploying your ASP.NET apps today?
Well, I get to cheat because I have an entire DevOps team that does all that stuff for me.
No, what is it though? What are they doing?
We just put. I mean, we have a massive involved TFS build process that goes through, does all the building, runs all kinds of tests and stuff, and then at the end of the day, I end up with MSI, and that's what we end up deploying to. Or well, in this case, it's a product that we end up shipping to customers. It's an MSI.
Right.
Sometimes we actually create an executable because there's some admin things you need to do that the executable runs with. But ultimately, yes, the out of the what gets at the end of the day is MSI. A lot of other places, though, we've still just done the Xcopy deployment.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I kind of still prefer that. I don't know. I just like that idea that, at least for a website, if I just need to change one file, why to go through a whole MSI? I'm just want to upgrade jQuery. That's just my preference. Yeah. Or
what about you?
JavaScript.
I've seen the web deploy stuff get used to varying success. It's like web deploy as it evolved. It might mess up your process, and then so you just said, well, we're not going to upgrade web deploy, and it became kind of a mess. Xcopy, I've seen places just say, well, if there's a strict separation between maybe dev and what happens in ops, then ops just wants you to give them a file of a folder of files. I've seen that.
Yeah. What does web deploy buy you over Xcopy? And not the marketing answer, like the just practical application.
It was just a packaging thing. I can't say it was better.
Yeah.
I mean, you might as well put it in a zip file, except theoretically, you could walk over to IIS Manager and like have a little bit of wizardry help you install it, but it wasn't like it was helping you with that much.
I think it's more of a preference
thing.
I mean,
technically, web deploy could unzip the files, put them where you want, create the app pool, create the website. It can do that, but you only have to do that once.
Yeah.
Although, see, now we're talking about the way we're talking about this. Though we're talking about servers as long-lived things, and one of the things .NET Core is helping us move to is servers as cattle. I wouldn't possibly one way that I could go about pushing .NET Core out. And I don't even want to mention Docker, but that's one way, is to just say, look, here's the code. Go put it on a brand new VM. Go put it create a new Docker image. And so you're not upgrading the current servers anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
You're living in some kind of virtual environment, or some not virtual environment, but a host of some kind.
Yeah.
That has the dependencies. Well, I guess the one question. Yeah.
I'm kind of split between the two worlds. I'm currently in the MSI world. Just kind of that's what's being forced on me.
Yeah.
But then also when I do have the opinion, almost all of my builds it basically end up being my personal builds. They're all integrated with Git. Whether it's a private Git or GitHub. I have a build attached to them, and that build does the deployment. So a lot of my sites are in Azure, and so in the Azure website, you create a website, you point it to a GitHub repo, and it says, tell me which branch. Yeah, and so anytime you commit, it compiles, it runs tests, and then if they pass, then it just updates your site. And I literally don't even know how my stuff is deployed.
Yeah, I like doing that for personal projects too.
Yeah.
Because now it's just source. I'm not even.
Because
I don't even have a data center.
And have a good understanding how it works, but then you don't want to have to spend 10 minutes every time you deploy tweaking. I mean, that's the big problem with Xcopy, right? It's a manual effort.
Yes,
it's a repetitive manual effort.
Yeah.
And obviously, too, we start talking about like cloud infrastructure or server farm. You don't want to have to manually copy out the 10, 20, hundreds of servers.
Yep. Well, no, it's not
let the computer
manually.
do the work.
I mean, so it's funny when you say Xcopy. 5 years ago for me, maybe 10 years ago for me, that did mean like I manually go and run an Xcopy command. But today when I say Xcopy, I'm really talking about something that's running on a build server that happens to
A
be an
build action.
Xcopy command that takes the output of that build process and points it to some server, and it even goes and does the diff to say only update the latest one using robocopy or something like that, right? And it can actually go and just say, well, this already exists, so don't update it.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, now that we're talking about Core specifically, I haven't really saw anything. Is there really any difference? Does Core introduce any other new deployment mechanism, or is it just the same standard Visual Studio options, Xcopy,
the
Web
biggest
Deploy?
difference for me isn't a matter of tooling in regards to getting files from one place to another, but it is I think we talked about this in a previous episode, it's the fact that it's running as a module. So there's configuration if you're going to run it on IIS or anywhere. I mean, if you're going to run it on Apache and Linux or whatever, you have to have this kind of environment set up and ready to host you, right? And so that's going to require some configuration. But if that configuration is a Docker container or whatever, or some scripted VM or something that you make, even better. So that is the one kind of consideration, is that you are going to need, in IIS, you're going to need the ASP.NET Core module. But no, I mean, other than that, I think it's really, really conducive to containers, Docker images, and running it in that way.
Which is not a new concept. I mean, back in the old days of the mainframe, we had this idea as containers. You had some kind of runtime environment that would run your code and execute your code. And when it was done, it was done. It could respawn itself off. So
yeah, it's just a whole lot easier to do these days.
Yeah, and I think it's there's a level of predictability, right? Like with Docker, one of the things I like about Docker is I know exactly that's what it is. I don't have to worry about like some random server somewhere having 3 other things that I didn't expect. I have more control exactly what my runtime environment is going to be, which particularly for production is very important because those are the weird problems you run into. I deployed to this third server over here, and all of a sudden things don't work, and you're like, well, what the heck's the difference between this server and that server? You run down rabbit holes.
Yep, absolutely.
So is there any other tooling in Core that's relevant to our discussion today? We talked about Yeoman.
I don't think we have time to talk about that now.
Well, I mean, there's the whole OmniSharp project, which I feel like was really being talked about a lot about a year ago. And then, to be frank, the Visual Studio tooling arrived. And so we're not hearing about it that much. I think there was a little backlash, too, of, wow, you guys keep showing off Sublime and Atom, and are you saying Visual Studio's not going to be great for this? But, I mean, it's an interesting project. It will always, it's an open source project, so it's a possibility that it will always be catching up. I don't know if that's true. I mean, we can see the preview tooling's catching up, so maybe that's just the world now, is that in order to deploy quickly, first they've got to get .NET Core and ASP.NET Core updated, so that means getting all of the command line stuff updated, and then you got to get the tooling to follow behind. How can it march in lockstep?
Yeah, well, and Sublime Text, Visual Studio Code, those things in particular, Atom, those things in particular, and OmniSharp that is trying to provide IntelliSense and some tooling on top of them, those things were never meant to be and will never be full-blown IDEs. That's the whole point, right? You want an IDE, you get Eclipse, or you get the JetBrains one, or you get Visual Studio. And so
programming editors are supposed to be
quick, they're editors, yes. So to have
low friction.
To have IntelliSense or autocomplete and everything, yeah, those are the kind of features that you would expect, and OmniSharp is pretty nice for that. Maybe some integrated keystrokes to say, go ahead and build, right? Control-Shift-B in Visual Studio Code actually goes and builds and maybe even runs your application, right? Yes, awesome. That's definitely it. But then to have this additional integration, like the Bower stuff and everything that you have in Visual Studio, you may be able to do that, like the Visual Studio Code or Sublime Text platforms may be able to offer those extensions, but the more extensions you add, the worse your performance is going to be. Yeah. At that point, why don't you just go use Visual Studio, which is the best IDE out there, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it's the best tool. I mean, it's one of the best applications out there. So that's why I really think a lot of people are going to continue to use Visual Studio in development, But when they go to deploy to their servers, they might be running Linux and now would use code to configuration, or on their build server they're going to use Gulp or Grunt or whatever. They may have code there to be able to configure things and get things working. We're not just living in this single world now where everything has to be identical.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've tried in earnest to use Visual Studio Code with OmniSharp and everything. And granted, I haven't done it in a couple of months. I haven't done it with the RTM, but I've always been left wanting, like knowing what the full-blown Visual Studio experience is and sitting there waiting for me. It's never that.
Yeah.
And it does give me features above and beyond the basic kind of autocomplete that Visual Studio Code would give me out of the box, but not like so much more that it's really getting me anywhere close to a full-blown Visual Studio replacement.
Yeah.
Right. So
I've always looked at code too as their answer to people who may be coming from the non-Microsoft world who don't even know about Visual Studio.
Totally.
Right. I've been working with a bunch of younger kids who their experience through college or other places, they was just using whatever editor they had available. They go in the Visual Studio to like, this is like too many bells and whistles. It's too many things to figure out how to do. And I'm like, you just got to figure it out. It's such a powerful tool, but it's not necessarily the best tool for everything. Right? If I'm just doing a single page app, it may be overkill to have Visual Studio.
And they're totally right. I mean, there's so much tooling in Visual Studio that I have literally never even run once, let alone on a regular basis. Right? Like.
All the what's in there now? The freaking it's not the health monitor or anything, but there's something that comes up now. It's like, well, I didn't want that one to go away.
Yeah, the analytics. Yeah.
Yeah, the analytics. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is going to get better with the new version, the next version of Visual Studio, with that really nice inline installer that says, "You tell me what you want." Right? You want a 200 meg installation of Visual Studio? Sure.
They finally realized after 20-some years that maybe we need to have a little more than that big wizard where you go like, do I want C++ compiler in my stuff? Do I want SQL stuff? I need a little more packaging, right? I mean, ultimately, that's how I look at it too. All this eventually gets down to good code, right? The idea of things being modular and packaging, and I opt into things as opposed to having this big monolithic thing to deal with.
Yep. All right. Anything more? Is that it?
No, I think we kind of hit it all.
Okay.
At least until the next version comes out, and maybe they'll change it on us.
It'll be interesting. Yeah, right. There's the next version of tooling to come. We'll see what happens in the final tooling, but it'll also be interesting to me to see where people land, because I don't know if you've had this experience, but how many web API projects, legacy, they're legacy, they're done, they're shipped, they're products, and you still see like the values controller in there. Nobody ever removed it.
Yeah.
So
that's
you
the
know
test
that
one to make sure it works. Come on.
You know that they started with file new project, and so I guess this was our point at the beginning of this: is file new project is a powerful guide, not just guide,
very prescriptive.
But it's a powerful. It has a powerful effect on the community. Well, this is, I guess, where I should get started. You're going to tinker, and the next thing you know, you're going to have a product. Well, I'm not going to change it now. We're close. This actually works.
You're funny talking about values collections. I've seen people have actually those methods in other controllers. So they started out with the values collections, renamed it.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, why are you returning a string in your customer controller? That don't make any sense.
Yep. So. Yeah, well, that is the funny thing, is that we're recording this on August 15th, and the new version is probably going to come out at the end of September, the actual RTM of the tooling, and everything that we talked about here is going to be.
And by then there'll be a new Gulp Grunt XYZ thing out there. The web keeps changing.
I mean, in all seriousness, all that being said, yes, we are going to see the RTM version of the tooling. So everything that we're talking about specifically right now for the ASP.NET Core tooling may not be the final version, but I think everything that we talked about in this episode in regards to, should we use NPM, Bower, all that stuff, I think that's still going to be pretty relevant.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It definitely will be relevant. Just one may be different based on how the template may or may not do it for you out of the box.
Definitely. And you, listener, what do you think? Have you tried out the new tooling? What do you think about it? How about Grunt, Gulp? Do you use the IDE experience all the time, or do you prefer the command line? Please, we want to know. Let us know. You can visit the website at staticvoidpodcast.com or shoot us an email to comments@staticvoidpodcast.com. And Chris, Todd, thanks for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, listener. But it's what? Okay. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time on the Static Void podcast. Okay, I forget that. I don't know why I had such a tough time with the ending.
Could be because it's 12:30 in the morning. We can stop recording, right?
That is a big thing. And to be fair, I didn't just have a tough time with the ending. I had a tough time throughout the whole thing. I'm like
We can stop recording.
babbling, flopping over my words. Yeah, sure. Bye, internet.